everyone, it's Monday and you're watching Within the Frame. I'm Kim Bo-kyung. China's outspoken former Foreign Minister Qin Gang has been removed from office after a months-long disappearance, and experienced diplomat Wang Yi is back. Reasons for the shakeup remain veiled, but as Wang Yi served as the foreign minister for roughly a decade and has deeper understanding of South Korea, many are expecting ties between Seoul and Beijing to show improvement. But will they really? In what direction will China's foreign policy go? And does this hint that Xi Jinping's more consolidated power is expanding into diplomacy? To talk about this, we have Professor Choi Hyun-jin from Kyung Hee University in the studio. Professor Choi, welcome.
Good evening, Bo-kyung.
Good evening. And we also have Professor Mason Richey from Hankuk University of Foreign Studies. Professor Richey, thank you for your time.
Great, thanks for having me.
All right, now first question to our Professor Choi. Now, Qin Gang has been replaced with Wang Yi. Before we delve deeper into the details, I'd like to first ask our Professor Choi about the operation of China's foreign diplomacy. So Wang Yi is currently the director of the Foreign Affairs Commission of the ruling Chinese Communist Party. Does his role include giving orders to foreign ministers?
Yes, Wang Yi is currently a member of the Political Bureau of the Chinese Communist Party, and also director of the Communist Party's Office of the Foreign Affairs Commission. And this office exercises general oversight on foreign policy issues of China. And the foreign relations law of China states that this commission is responsible for policymaking, deliberation, and also the coordination for the conduct of Chinese foreign relations. And the law also states that this commission formulates the China's foreign relations strategy and the major principles, providing guidelines to foreign ministry. And therefore, you're right, even before he returns to Ministry of Foreign Affairs, he was in a higher position that designs, coordinates, and also supervises the implementation of Chinese foreign policy.
Right, I see. Now, Professor Richey, ousted former Foreign Minister Qin Gang was known for his wolf warrior diplomacy style, but after his month-long absence, he was eventually replaced. Now, what do you believe was the main reason behind such replacement?
So I'm going to do something I shouldn't do and be completely honest with you and tell you that I actually don't know the answer to that question. There are a lot of rumors. One of them is that he has a health issue. That's sort of been the quasi-official line, so to speak. Although the Chinese Communist Party hasn't really given a reason for his removal from the position of foreign minister. It seems like that might be unlikely given the fact that mention of him has been scrubbed from the Ministry of Foreign Affairs website. So even past meetings that he participated in, have now been blanked. And the sense seems to be that there's more going on than just a. Some other possibilities include rather salaciously a potential liaison, romantic liaison with a mistress in Hong Kong. Although, again, it's not necessarily the case that that type of indiscretion would result in this type of very quick disappearance from view and removal from office. It's not impossible, but it's certainly not the first thing that one might think of. There's a possibility that perhaps there was some type of diplomatic faux pas that was serious enough that he made when Antony Blinken and he were meeting recently, and that might have led to it in some way. And then, of course, there's a possibility of bureaucratic infighting within the Chinese Communist Party, within the circle around Xi Jinping, and within the foreign ministry, and within the Foreign Affairs Commission in the Chinese Communist Party. If I had to bet, I would probably bet it's the last of those, or perhaps a mixture of several of those things, where perhaps infighting led to the use of dirt against him in order to have him removed. I think what's interesting about this is perhaps not so much in itself the reason for Qin Gang's removal. I think that it says something perhaps about the consolidation of power of Xi Jinping. And one way to read this is that Wang Yi has now come back into power in the foreign ministry as foreign minister. But as we just heard, that's not really where the power lays, because the foreign minister is really there to implement policy. What I think might be going on here is that this represents bureaucratic infighting that perhaps damages Xi Jinping a little bit. Qin Gang was known to be very close to Xi Jinping. That's how he got that position as foreign minister, and it was well known that within the foreign ministry he wasn't appreciated very much, wasn't liked very much, and was seen as being a usurper of the position of foreign minister too quickly because of his direct connection to Xi Jinping. So if it's the case that, in fact, he was removed because of bureaucratic infighting, that might be seen in some ways as going against the wishes and the connections to Xi Jinping, which might indicate that there's a chink in Xi Jinping's armor, which in some ways we haven't seen in a while. In any event, I think this damages China's international reputation. It shows the opacity of the regime. And if I were an investor, for instance, looking at China, I would look at this as one more negative data point in whether or not I should be invested in China in terms of business because of the political risk.
Right, I see. We'll never know the truth behind the reason of Qin Gang's such replacement, but as our Professor Richey told us, there could be many possibilities and the reasons. Now, Professor Choi, so usually senior Chinese officials who have disappeared from public view are revealed to have been detained for, investigation by the Chinese Communist Party's disciplinary watchdog months later. Do you believe this is also the case for Qin Gang as well?
And as you said, some senior Chinese officials have disappeared for several months and later revealed that they have been detained for investigation by the Communist Party. And such sudden disappearance have become a common feature of Chinese politics, especially during Xi Jinping's anti-corruption campaign. For example, in September 2018, Meng Hongwei, a former Chinese politician and the head of the International Criminal Police Organization, that is Interpol, suddenly disappeared while he was traveling to China. And about 10 days later, it became known that the China's National Inspection Commission was detaining him, and he was eventually convicted of bribery and other charges and also imprisoned. And in an interview 3 years later, his wife said the history of sudden disappearance by power is repeating itself. And therefore, it is somehow understandable to suspect that this kind of disappearance and investigation happened to Qin Gang as well, although we have no such evidence right now. And just 2 weeks ago, there was a question about Qin Gang's prolonged absence at a press briefing, and there, a Chinese Foreign Ministry spokesperson said that she had no information to provide. And therefore, I think this kind of disappearance and also lots of rumors are driven by a lack of transparency in the Chinese political system, where information is closely censored and important decisions are mostly made behind closed doors.
Right, I see. So there could be possibility that Qin Gang is detained for investigation, but we'll never know. Right. Now, Professor Richey, let's turn our focus to Wang Yi. Why Wang Yi? I mean, is it his experience serving as a foreign minister for 10 years that has resulted in his appointment once again? And now that he is foreign minister, a member of the Politburo of the Chinese Communist Party, and director of Foreign Affairs Commission of the party as well, is this a usual position one can get?
Certainly, having this portfolio of mandates, especially the way that it's happened so suddenly, and in the case of Wang Yi returning to a previous post that he's already held, is indeed unusual. And that's, I think, again, part of the reason why I see the disappearance of Qin Gang and the removal of him as foreign minister as being a sign of trouble within the Chinese Communist Party and within the government of China, rather than an expansion of Xi Jinping's power. Again, this could all ultimately just be driven by a health issue, but it doesn't necessarily seem that that's the most likely scenario. So, what I think is going on with the appointment of Wang Yi again as foreign minister to replace the suddenly removed Qin Gang is to simply have a safe pair of hands. I think the Chinese Communist Party and Xi Jinping and his close circle realized that, the disappearance of Qin Gang from public view when he was still foreign minister, and then, of course, the very sudden and inexplicable removal does damage China's reputation a little bit. And having Wang Yi come back in, he's a known quantity by diplomats and leaders all over the world. He's a known quantity for business leaders, and I think this is a way to message stability after this symbol or symptom of some type of instability potentially within the Chinese Communist foreign policy apparatus. But if I had to guess, I would say that Wang Yi won't hold the position of foreign minister for an extremely long time. I would think that, in fact, this is largely considered to be a temporary measure in order to set up someone else to come in and succeed him and take over, since Wang Yi's done this before. And as I mentioned earlier, Wang Yi's energies, as senior as he is, should now be largely put into foreign policy design, which is what his current position in the Politburo and in the Foreign Affairs Commission of the party is for, rather than policy implementation, which is largely what the foreign ministry and the foreign minister are for.
Right, I see. So this is a temporary measure just until the new person can take over Qin Gang's position. All right. Now, Professor Choi, some point out that this reshuffle is an expansion of the diplomatic domain of Xi Jinping's leadership, with the party exercising more control over the government. What's your view on this?
I somehow disagree with this kind of interpretation. So I don't think that this reshuffle was intentional or pre-planned for Xi Jinping's leadership. So we need to remember that Qin Gang was fired after just 7 months in office. It was the shortest tenure of a foreign minister since the founding of modern China in 1949. And Xi Jinping's decision to remove Qin Gang after such a short period of time and the reappointment of Wang Yi shows the dire international situation China is facing now. The China is currently engaged in a hegemonic rivalry with the United States as its economy struggles to rebound. And this is why Wang Yi, who has extensive diplomatic experience, was brought to the foreign ministry once again to stabilize foreign policy of China. And therefore, and I think this reshuffle was not an expansion of Xi Jinping's leadership, but reflects the top leadership's urgency to stabilize foreign affairs, especially with the United States.
Interesting. Now, one more question, Professor Choi. I'd like to also focus on Wang Yi's schedules right after he was reappointed as the foreign minister. He attended the BRICS National Security Advisors and High Representatives on National Security meeting last week. Now, first of all, how does China view ties with BRICS countries, and what is the reason and intention behind China's such solidifying and intensifying ties with developing countries?
So first of all, BRICS is an acronym for 5 emerging economies, including Brazil, Russia, India, China, and also South Africa. So he attended the BRICS high-level security ministers meeting in South Africa on July 25th. And Wang Yi, during this meeting, Wang Yi said that we must resist unilateralism and hegemonic practice and oppose the destruction of multilateral cooperation by close and exclusive small groups. And I guess here, this close and exclusive small group means the United States and NATO. And he also added that China will promote more substantive cooperation with the BRICS partners to counter global security challenges. And this shows that China sees the BRICS as a key pillar of a multipolar system that can challenge the Western-centered unipolar system led by the United States. And here, the multipolar system means international politics where the multiple great powers with relatively equal strengths compete and cooperation each other. So Wang's comments can be seen as a call for a greater cooperation among BRICS members to counter the United States and NATO, which are casting a wide net of security and economic measures to contain China. And by the way, also it is important to know that the the other members, other than these BRICS members, such as Belarus, Iran, Saudi Arabia, and the UAE, and also attended this BRICS meeting to discuss cybersecurity issues. And this shows that China's willingness and also intention of solidifying relations with larger groups of developing countries beyond the BRICS.
Right, I see. So China is aiming for a multipolar system in terms of international politics arena, and that is the reason why it is solidifying ties with developing countries. All right, now, Professor Richey, meanwhile, Russian President Vladimir Putin is scheduled to visit China during the Belt and Road Forum for International Cooperation in October. Now, what does that suggest?
I think that just suggests the continuation of the strategic partnership between Moscow and Beijing. Obviously, those two countries have become, in some ways, closer to each other ever since the Ukraine war has started. Of course, the strategic partnership predates that, and they were coming closer together even prior to that, of course. But China is, of course, using Russia's isolation opportunistically in its own way in order to increase its leverage over Russia, notably in terms of economic cooperation, where China can benefit from oil and gas as well as from other trading and commercial relations with Russia. And of course, in Russia's case, it really requires, given its isolation, China as a backstop, as a strategic partner and benefactor who can help keep Russia plugged in to the global economy. And so this is important commercially for Russia as well. And of course, also diplomatically, it's very important for China to have Russia's diplomatic back, so to speak, at the United Nations and in other international multilateral fora. So I don't think that there's anything particularly significant about this related to Qin Gang's ouster. I think this is just a normal continuation of the strategic partnership. And of course, from China's perspective, they're going to want some type of update from Russia about what's going on in Ukraine. They're going to want to know more about the status of the front in Ukraine, the possibilities for off-ramps from this Ukraine war, and what those might look like.
Right, I see. Now, Professor Choi, what matters is also the ties between China and the U.S. And now that Wang Yi has returned, how do you expect the relationship between Beijing and Washington to be?
Yeah, so while media have expressed interest in Chinese foreign policy under Wang Yi, but personally, I see the little chance of any breakthrough in the relationship between China and the United States. The Wang Yi already served as a foreign minister before Qin Gang, so his return to the office is unlikely to significantly change the direction of China's foreign policy toward the U.S. And in addition, the reappointment of Wang Yi would not change the structural causes of rivalry between the two countries, such as a competition over the global semiconductor value chain. Though Wang Yi also has been a center of a hawkish foreign policy as well. And although he's known for some friendliness and flexibility, but I think he's no different from Xi Jinping in his pursuit of China-centered hegemony and also nationalist beliefs. So for example, in last February, he met with the U.S. Secretary of State, Tony Blinken, in Germany. And during the meeting, the both ministers openly argued over Chinese spy balloon incident, the balloon which was shot down by America. And as a result of this, the relation between the United States and China rapidly soured. And of course, the U.S. State Department officially announced that it looked forward to the high-level talks between the two countries, but I do not find any specific reasons to expect an improvement in bilateral relations in the near future.
Right. Well, how about ties between Seoul and Beijing? I mean, some experts point out that Wang Yi's return could offer greater momentum for bilateral ties because Wang Yi has deeper understanding of South Korea. Do you agree with that?
Yes, I partly agree. So unlike the United States, South Korea has some reason to hope for improved relation with China with Wang Yi's return. Wang Yi is known to have a strong understanding of South Korea. So he visited Korea 5 times since taking over as foreign minister in 2014. And also, there was a conflict between the two countries in 2016 over the deployment of THAAD missile defense system. And during the time, the Wang Yi visited South Korea in December 2019, and this visit really helped to normalize bilateral relationship between South Korea and China. And also, Wang met with the foreign minister Park Jin in Jakarta, Indonesia on July 14 on the sidelines of the ASEAN Regional Security Forum. And both ministers emphasized strengthening bilateral communication and also rebuilding trust. And here, Wang said, we want the China-Korea Strategic Cooperation Partnership to return to a sound and stable development trajectory. And this raises some expectation for improved relations between the two countries. And some observers also expect that the possible visit of Wang Yi to South Korea in the near future could improve soured relations between the two countries.
Right, I see. Now, we are running out of time, but Professor Richey, I'd like to ask you this last question. So there is also expectation of a potential three-way summit between Seoul, Tokyo, and Beijing. Regular meetings between the three have been suspended since 2019, and now it is Seoul's turn to host the meeting. If it does take place, could it become a turning point for the three countries?
I would be careful about language that's that optimistic, such as turning point. But obviously, talking is better than not talking. And like many of these meetings, I think that you can sort of put a floor under the relationship so that you won't have misunderstandings that grow into bigger problems. So I think that that's certainly one outcome, probably the most likely, and at least the most likely best outcome. I think that we have to remember that, as Professor Choi just mentioned, the structural factors that separate China from the United States and are fueling this rivalry. They have downstream effects on countries like South Korea and Japan, who are U.S. allies. And so the shadow of the structural rivalry between the U.S. and China is simply going to make dramatically improved relations between Seoul and Beijing or between Tokyo and Beijing hard. But there are, of course, there's some regional security issues. North Korea can be discussed, obviously. The environment should be discussed. One of the things that probably would come up would be the Fukushima nuclear reactor water release into the Pacific Ocean. So, these are all areas where, discussions could take place that could put a floor under the relationship and hopefully prevent any misunderstandings from growing out of control.
All right, I see. Now, unfortunately, this is all the time we have for today's edition, but thank you, Professor Richey, for your time and insights, and Professor Choi for your time and insights as well. We really appreciate it. All right, that's all for Within the Frame tonight. We'll be back tomorrow with more in-depth stories. Thank you for watching, and goodbye.